Thank you all so much for joining our chat today. Today we're speaking about when boys are struggling with their marks or they're disappointed in the results that they got. And I'm very pleased to have Cathy van Zwan with me here today. She's the head of Academic Enrichment within the college space. And Cathy, I'm so sorry that we're so far apart and we've got our screens in place, but obviously with social distancing and COVID regulations, we need to make sure that we're all safe while we're here on campus.
Thanks, Mickey, and thank you for having me.
Pleasure. So obviously most of us are back on campus, and some of our boys have been writing standardized tests, some of them have had test weeks. And I want to know, how do you think that the boys are managing with this?
Yeah, it's certainly been a very interesting year, as we all know. There are great benefits for our boys for being back on campus. Those classroom dynamics, the live teaching situations, the social situations are certainly really positive for many of our boys that have been back on campus. But we must acknowledge that the boys have had a term at home, and so they have been writing tests whilst they were at home, and those tests have been very quiet. They've been in their bedrooms possibly, or in a quiet place in their homes, and now they've come back to this large, loud, alive campus, and they are sitting in venues where there's obviously the group dynamic, the anxiety that you have as a group. Did you do that question? How was that? Did you get this answer? So I think whilst there certainly have been some huge positives for the boys to be back on campus, these particular tests and exams that we've had of late have certainly probably been a little bit more challenging for our boys than when they've been used to it and in their strides with exams. So there certainly have been some disappointing marks and some disappointed boys and parents.
Yes, I completely agree. I think that some of the boys have been quite disappointed in their results, and I was wanting to know from you, what would you recommend that they do if they are disappointed in the results that they've got?
Well, there's nothing worse for a student when he feels that he's prepared for his exams and they haven't gone his way and he gets his set of results. The first thing I would suggest is that a student does an honest reflection of his exam prep. And what I mean by that is it's quite easy to fool ourselves, and we would think, yes, but I did prepare, or I really did study. But when we examine the intricacies of it and the ins and outs, the boys are generally often honest with us that in fact maybe they did lie on their bed and just read their notes, or they looked at a worksheet that was on perhaps a Google Classroom, and as we dig a little deeper, they're not necessarily they weren't necessarily as prepared as they could have been before the exams. And so it's very difficult because they'll be disappointed, but what do we do now? The marks haven't gone their way, and the boys now need to find some way to pick themselves up, to carry on, to dig deep, some grit and resilience, which sounds so easy. It's so easy for us to sit here and chat like this, and the boys must just carry on, and it's very difficult. And I know as a psychologist you probably have some advice for the boys about that.
Yeah, so I think it's very important for them to use this as an opportunity not to shut down and not to give up and not to put the tests in their bags and pretend like they never happened and didn't exist, because then it's much easier to deal with emotionally.
Right.
I think I would definitely advise that they take it as a starting point, no matter where they're starting from, because that way they're able to make use of the results instead of just pretending like it doesn't exist.
Okay.
So I think that they would need to try and start making goals and start thinking about the term ahead. We're not far off from midterm already. And I think some of the boys might feel quite alone, that they don't quite know where to start or so they might be willing to dig deep, but they don't know what that entails. So if they aren't sure where to begin, where would you suggest they begin?
Absolutely. So the boys are not alone. If the exams haven't gone their way, they certainly are not now over to you, sort this out, do better. Absolutely not. So absolutely, first and foremost, their teachers are the first port of call. So teachers will, within a classroom setting, they will go over the test, and there may have been a question that most of the students got wrong, or quite a few of the students, or the way that a question was answered, many of the boys may have got that wrong. So very definitely, I think that's the first port of call, is to go through that class session with the teachers, pay close attention to that. Over and above that, there will be some questions where the teacher hasn't emphasized that question as being one the class struggled with or so on. So my advice then would be for the boys to ask their teachers for some advice and some guidance on their specific paper, maybe to ask a teacher for half an hour to sit down with them and go through the paper, which is invaluable time spent with the teacher. The learning opportunities from that, the boys can see exactly where they personally went wrong and hopefully therefore learn and not make that mistake again. I must say, some of the boys also feel that they are entitled to marks that they didn't receive from the teacher. So boys will often query with teachers, but ma'am, you didn't give me that or that or that mark. And I think it's very important for the boys to understand that there's a process for that. Papers are moderated, questions are moderated. Even before the exams are given to the boys, there's a moderation process. So if a student does feel that they are entitled to some marks, it's absolutely critical that in a respectful manner, they do need to approach those teachers and work out why they weren't necessarily awarded that mark when they thought they were. You're a teacher, Mickey, you'll know that happens.
Yes, completely. And I think that it's more helpful if they are unsure about a mark, that I'd prefer that they come and talk to me about it, because then we can clarify what they didn't understand. So often, sometimes they feel like they've given the answer, but they haven't really. So when you go through it with them and you explain, okay, well, this is what you've said, but you think you've said this, but you actually haven't given us the point. And I believe from an emotional perspective, it's very important that they feel heard. They don't often feel heard. They often feel quite dismissed, I think, in general, as teenagers are, because they come up with these weird and wacky ideas of things they want to do. So I think being able to connect with their teacher and really feel like they've been heard and they can understand why it is that perhaps they didn't get a mark is very important. And so, Cathy, are there any other avenues? So you've spoken about going to their teachers. Are there any other avenues that they could pursue?
Absolutely. So I mentioned it a little bit before with the honest reflection, the way the boys are studying and preparing for tests. The boys who've been through the enrichment space will know, because they hear me say this all the time, simply reading over their notes, simply lying on their beds and looking at a textbook, that is not as valuable as sitting down, writing, making their own notes, going over past papers. If the teachers have provided resources, redoing them, doing exercise 2.2 that was a couple of weeks ago for homework, doing it again, looking at the memos. So very definitely their study skills would be something that they definitely could have a look at. All the boys in the college have a tutor at school, so sitting down with their tutors, getting some ideas. The tutors are all teachers. Getting some idea from them of some ideas of how to prep for exams and how much time to spend preparing for them. And of course the academic enrichment staff, as the boys know, we're always available for them if they want to come and ask for some help from us.
Right, so Cathy, you've spoken a little bit about exam prep and approaching teachers and the role that they have to play in their exams. Is there any other reason why an exam might go badly?
Yes, of course. So sometimes the way the questions are asked in an exam doesn't come the way the boys had expected that to. So the boys may be prepared for a question to be asked in a specific way, it's asked in a completely different way, and it can throw a student in the exam. If that happened in class and the boys were relaxed and they weren't under those stressful conditions, they probably would be fine. But it comes in the exam and it throws students a little bit, and then time becomes an issue. It's critically important that this happens. It's a very, very important learning moment, because we don't set all the matric exams. So we don't know how the matric examiner is going to phrase a certain question. So it's very good for the boys to get used to that. Some of the boys spot study, so they do follow the study techniques that I'd mentioned earlier properly, but they only study one section or a part of a section, and then that's a very small part of the exam, and the boys may have been hoping for that to be a much bigger part of the exam, so they aren't able to answer questions with in depth. And of course that brings up what I would think is the main reason, is that sometimes our boys' exam technique is where they fall short. And this is again why it's critically important to talk to the teacher. So sometimes students will come out of exams and they'll come and they'll tell us, oh ma'am, they've been really well and they've expected it to have gone really, really nicely, but in fact they haven't actually answered the question properly. So I'll give an example. A question may be 6 marks and it may say list and explain. And a student lists perfectly and will get 3 marks for listing, but they haven't explained. And I think that that's where the boys walk out feeling like it's gone so well, but they haven't necessarily answered the question properly. Exam technique also covers how much time should I spend on a question of 2 marks versus a question of 8 marks. Sometimes boys write far too much for 2 marks and not enough. Those sorts of things. So the exam technique, which is why again we would re-emphasize looking at those past papers and putting these kind of things into practice as well.
I think that's really good advice, and I think it's important that the boys start to think about that technique. It'll do them very well to learn it for the future.
Absolutely.
So we've spoken a little bit about why the boys might be disappointed. I think sometimes the parents also get disappointed in the results that their children receive. Do you have any advice for them?
Yes, absolutely. Advice and also empathy. As a parent, it's just so hard. You know your children better than anybody else, and you know their potential, and you know what they're capable of. You may have witnessed an inappropriate amount of time being used for exam preparation, or you may just generally be so hopeful for your child. You'll know your child's potential, and then a set of results will come out, or a test mark will come back. And it's extremely frustrating for parents, but not only frustrating, it's also very, very anxiety invoking, and parents get anxious. So it's very hard to give advice to parents in that situation, particularly for our boys in the high school. It's very important to step back. It's very important to understand that your son has written the exam, your son has failed the exam. It's not you, it's not you personally, it's not a personal attack on you by your child. It's very hard not to feel that way. So I guess I would encourage parents to encourage their children to go through the processes that we've already talked about, to approach their teachers. And sometimes boys are not sure how to approach a teacher. So the parents could give some advice of, it would be a good idea to email Mrs. So-and-so. In the email, give some context. I would like to discuss question 4. Would you have some time to make available for me? Some teachers are fine that their boys contact them on their phones, but we need to be sure that is appropriate, that the teacher is okay with that. And most important of all, it's very, very hard to let your children fail. But we wouldn't be here today if we hadn't failed and made so many mistakes in our lives. We need to let our children fail, and we need to catch them and help them to pick themselves up and carry on. And as you so importantly said earlier, this is a starting point. This is not the end. This is not an ending if it hasn't gone their way. But it is very difficult. It's very, very hard when a parent is so disappointed for their children.
Yeah, and I think that's a very key point, is that by us feeling disappointed, we have every right to feel disappointed sometimes in the results. But at the same time, through feeling that, we're modeling for them how to respond when we're feeling that way specifically.
That's absolutely. And it's sometimes important that we must have those conversations with our students. We can't also just let it go as parents. We are their parents, and we do need to model for them. So how we speak to them is so important. We've all had, many times, my own children will tell you, we're in the heat of the moment. We've had those conversations. The son gets in our car and we just let them have it. And we are not in control of our emotions. And so we are simply adding to the student's sense of disappointment and failure. So where possible, we need to take a step back, maybe wait for a day or until we feel in control of our emotions before we speak to our children about something. We need to calm down and model our approach to them. And so that goes a long way to helping and supporting our children to build that resilience and help to pick themselves up and carry on and put right the steps that haven't gone their way in the recent test or exams.
Yeah, and I think it's important, like you've stated, is that it's their test, it's not our test.
Absolutely.
And we do sometimes take it very personally when they haven't done well.
Well, it's very hard not to. What makes it even worse, Mickey, is that it's very hard for parents to talk to these monosyllabic, grumpy teens who don't want to engage with us, won't make eye contact, are not going to sit down like you and I are now and having these conversations. Do you have any advice for parents on this? What would you suggest?
So I think the key word that you've used there, Kath, is conversation. Is that often we go into these discussions as a lecture, and we are wanting the child to understand how disappointed we are in the results, or that we know that they didn't put enough effort in, or we're aware that they were playing online gaming instead of studying. And I think that it's very important for us to first assess what are we wanting to get out of the conversation. So yes, our children sometimes do need to know that we're quite disappointed in something that's happened, but at the same time, that's not necessarily going to lead to a conversation. So to create a discussion or a conversation, you've got to be prepared to hear what they have to say on their side. And I know you've said it's hard with teenagers because they're not always prepared to tell us, but sometimes they also then end up just telling us what they want us to hear, or they think we want to hear. And I think that's the problem, is sometimes we don't give them enough time to answer once we've asked a question, and the minute it's not necessarily going the way we think it should be going, or they're not answering the way we think they should be answering, we jump in and say, yeah, but. So I would go in with a very open mind and with a very open kind of environment, so that we want to have a conversation about this. We want to be on the same page. It's not about accusing anyone. It's about making a plan. It's around thinking, well, what was it about the geography test that made it a bit easier to study for? Did you study for that one differently than you did for Afrikaans? And those are the things that are so integral in a conversation that you're not going to get from a lecture, perhaps. I think it's also important that we reflect back on the fact that this has been an experience. Exams are difficult, and it's important for us to kind of connect how certain exams went in the conversation, so they know that we're interested in the first place. You know, they came out of that test and said that was really well, and then it's looking at those small things around. They actually didn't put the examples when they just only gave the list. And obviously this is something that the Wellness Department is more than happy to help and assist parents with. It is difficult, but we're here to support, so they can contact us at any time if they are unsure or would like some guidance about how to go around this.
And your details are obviously on the app, and they can get hold of you through those. Yeah. So Mickey, I think just to recap, this has been really, really great chatting to you. I think the honest reflection, open-ended conversations with parents, the boys looking at the exam prep, their techniques during the exam, making contact with those teachers in a respectful and polite fashion. I think all of these are those building blocks. We keep coming back to the resilience and the grit, but these are the building blocks that the boys could see a poor set of results as a starting point, not the end, or not it's all over, or I can't possibly ever do any better. So I think if I was to recap, those would probably be some of the important points. And of course the teachers and the wellness and academic enrichment team, we're here for our boys and our parents, so if they want to be in touch, do feel free to do so.
So obviously this has been a short chat, and we've kind of given some guidance, and we haven't gone into extreme depth and detail, but we would just really want our parents to know that we are here, we're available. We want to make sure that we're supporting our community, and we would like to thank you for the time you've taken to join us today. If you do have any questions, we are online. Feel free to post in the chat below. Thank you.
Thank you, Nikki. Thanks, everybody.